He asks after Alan, Lafcadio, that kind of thing. I'd like to tell him I've read his book. He had published The Town in the City, or The Town in the City by then. If that wouldn't sound gauche, obvious, and uncool. When the coffee arrives, Jack looks glum. He can't pay for it. He has no money, none at all. So obviously this is before he's famous. Okay. That morning, he'd handed his last $10 to a cashier in a grocery store and received change for a $5. He's waiting for a check from a publisher, he says angrily. I say, look, that's okay. I have money. Do you want me to buy you something to eat? Yeah, he says, Frankfurters. I'll pay you back. I always pay people back, you know. I've never bought a man dinner before. It makes me feel very competent and womanly. He has Frankfurters, home fries, and baked beans with Heinz ketchup on them. Kind of a far cry from Julia Child. I keep stealing looks at him because he's beautiful. You're not supposed to say a man is beautiful, but he is. He catches me at it and grins, then mugs it up, putting on one goofy face after another. A whole succession of old-time, ridiculous movie comedian faces flashes before me until I'm laughing, too, at the absurdity of this blind date Alan has arranged. As for what he saw in me that night, I'm not sure at all. A very young woman in a red coat, round-faced and blonde. An interesting young person, he wrote in Desolation Angels, one of his later books, of course. A Jewess, elegant, middle-class, sad, and looking for something. She looked Polish as hell. Where am I in all those funny categories? As our paths converge in Howard Johnson's, we're looking for different things. At 34, Jack's worn down, the energy that had moved him to so many different places gone. He's suddenly waited too long. The check for the Subterraneans will never arrive. On the Road will never be published. Why not let Alan rescue him? I see the blue, bruised eye of Kerouac and construe his melancholy as the look of a man needing love because I'm, among other things, 21 years old. I believe in the curative powers of love as the English believe in tea or Catholics believe in the miracle of Lord. Let's see. Okay. He tells me he spent 63 days on a mountaintop without anyone. He made pea soup and wrote in his journal and sang Sinatra songs to keep himself company. Some warning to me in all of this. You really liked being alone like that, I ask. I wish I was there now, he said. I should have stayed up there. He could somehow cancel you out and make you feel sad for him at the same time, but I'm sure any mountaintop would be preferable to where he's staying, the Marlton Hotel on 8th Street with the dirty shades over the windows and the winos lounging on the steps. And where do you live, Jack asks. He likes it that it's up near Columbia and the West End bar where he used to hang out. Was Johnny the bartender still there? Johnny the bartender would remember him from the days he was a football hero at Columbia, but he broke his leg his sophomore year and stayed in his room reading Celine and Shakespeare and never went back to football again, thus losing his scholarship at Columbia. But he's always had affection for the neighborhood. Why don't you let me stay at your place, he asks. If you wish, I say, in Desolation Angels, deciding fast, and I know how I said it too, as if it was of no great moment, as if I had no wishes of my own, in keeping with my current philosophy of nothing to lose, try anything. We stood up and put on our coats, went down into the subway, and there on the IRT, on a signboard I had never seen before that night, was an ad for an airline with a brand new slogan, Fly now, pay later. That's a good title for a novel, I said, and finally told Jack I was writing one. I wasn't just a secretary. He said, Pay me the penny after would be a better title. You should call your novel that. He asked me who my favorite writer was. I said Henry James, and he made a face and said he figured I had all the wrong models, but maybe I could be a great writer anyway. He asked me if I rewrote a lot and said you should never revise, never change anything, not even a word. He regretted all the rewriting he'd done on The Town in the City. No one could make him do that again, which was why he always got nowhere with the publishers. He was going to look at my work and show me that what you wrote first was always best. I said, okay, feeling guilty for all that I'd rewritten, but I still loved Henry James. All through this literary conversation, Jack stood swaying above me on the subway, hanging onto the strap. Just before we got off, he leaned down. Our foreheads scraped, our eyeballs loomed up on each other. A funny game where I knew that you weren't supposed to blink no matter what. And another one of my favorite passages is when the first big New York Times review comes out for On the Road. and an expert. She leads this chapter off with an excerpt from that review, written by Gilbert Milstein, 1957, September 5th. On the Road is the second novel by Jack Kerouac, and its publication is a historic occasion insofar as the exposure of an authentic work of art is of any great moment in an age in which the attention is fragmented and the sensibilities are blunted by these superlatives of fashion, multiplied a millionfold by the spirit and power of communication. So Joyce was there. There was a newsstand at 66th Street and Broadway, right at the entrance to the subway. Just before midnight, we woke up and threw on our clothes in the dark and walked down there, still groggy with the heaviness, the blacked-out sleep that comes after making love. According to Viking, there was going to be a review. Maybe it'll be terrific. Who knows, I said. Jack said he was doubtful. Still, we could stop at Donnelly's on the way back and have a beer. We saw the papers come off the truck. The old man at the stand cut the brown cord with a knife, and we bought the one on top of the pile and stood under a street lamp turning pages until we found the Books of the Times section. I felt dizzy reading the first paragraph, like going up on a Ferris wheel too quickly and dangling out over space, laughing and gasping at the same time. Jack was silent. After he'd read the whole thing, he said, "It's good, isn't it?" "Yes," I said. "It's very, very good." We walked to Donnelly's and spread the paper out on the bar and read the review together, line by line, 2 or 3 more times, like students poring over a difficult text for which they're going to be held responsible. The most beautifully executed, the clearest and most important utterance yet made by the generation Kerouac himself named years ago as Beat, and whose principal avatar he is. Just as more than any other novel of the 20s, The Sun Also Rises came to be regarded as the testament of the lost generation, so it seems certain that On the Road will become to be known as that of the Beat generation. It was all very thrilling, but frightening too. I'd read lots of reviews in my 2 years in publishing. None of them made pronouncements like this about history. What would history demand of Jack? What would a generation expect of its avatar? I remember wishing Allen Ginsberg was around to make sense of all this instead of being in Paris. Jack kept shaking his head. He didn't look happy exactly, but strangely puzzled, as if he couldn't figure out why he wasn't happier. We returned to the apartment to go back to sleep. Jack lay down obscure for the last time in his life. The ringing phone woke him the next morning, and he was famous. A couple more minutes here. And so there's a lot about that in here, and that's just a taste. Hardest part of this was deciding what to leave out. So then she's sort of a full-fledged bohemian, a full-fledged Beat. Bachelor poets, I soon noticed, seemed to live by an aesthetic of grime. Moving into a ruin, a poet would faithfully maintain it as such, filling the air behind the permanently filmed windows with nicotine and accumulating beer bottles so prodigiously that a monument to Miss Rheingold was created, too sacred for any trash can. Another approach to tenement life involves denial of the tenement as a tenement and insistence upon it as a charming place, once it had been stripped to its core, taken back virtually to its prehistory as a dwelling. Plaster was laboriously scraped off brick that had always been plastered. Windowsills and lintels were sanded raw. Decades of linoleum were ripped up to reveal floorboards underneath, even parquet, sometimes perfectly preserved by generations of housewives who, like my mother and Jack's, always put a covering on anything, quote, good. My mother couldn't understand why I'd returned to the streets my grandparents had struggled so hard to stay out of. At least we never lived on the Lower East Side, she said. We lived near Bronx Park when it was a beautiful area. At least we never lived in the slums. I loved the slums, my slums, the sweet slums of Bohemia and beatnikdom, where sunflowers and morning glories would bloom on fire escapes in the summer, and old ladies weighed down by breasts leaned on goose-down pillows and windows, self-appointed guardians of the street. And Tompkins Square with its onion-topped church had the grayness of photos of Moscow. Who would not wish to be a scuffler on 2nd Avenue? I bought 7-cent bagels and 10-cent half-sour pickles and sat up till dawn in Rappaport's, where they gave you a whole basket of rolls free, drinking coffee with a jazz trombonist from St. Louis and a poet just arrived from Chicago. I have one more little thing. Do I have time? Okay. I didn't spend a great deal of time at home. To this day, I have a triangular scar on my left thumb, reminding me of the night I rushed to my apartment after after a day of being a temporary typist for an insurance company, determined to rush out again after the boring necessity of making dinner. 2 pork chops frozen together threatened to hold me up. I hacked away at them, cut some flesh off my thumb in the process, wrapped a dish towel around my wound, and went out anyway, bleeding all the way across town to the Cedar Bar. Franz Klein, the famous artist, asked to examine my thumb and lectured me. If I were your father, I'd take you to get stitches. Well, I didn't want to miss anything, I told him. No, of course not, he said. Still holding my wrist, he shook his head with a gleam of mischievous understanding in his eyes. I love that. So, I think, do I still have time?
Yeah, you got something else.
I will, just a tiny bit. There's one paragraph that's really nice that kind of contrasts the 50s with the 60s, since she was more of a 50s beat type. The 60s were never quite my time. They seemed anticlimactic for all their fireworks. Some culmination had been short-circuited. I saw hippies replace beatniks, sociologists replace poets, the empty canvas replace the Franz Klein. Unenthusiastically, I observed the emergence of, quote, lifestyle, the old intensities of blanding out into do your own thing, the commandment of a freedom excised of struggle. Ecstasy had become chemical. Forgetfulness could be had by prescription. Revolution was in the wind, but it never came. And if it had, there would have been no room in its orthodoxies for a Kerouac. She's just a really wonderful writer, and I highly recommend this memoir.